Hello, welcome to our Understanding Financial Aid 101, completing the 2019-2020 FAFSA and CSS Financial Aid Profile. Hopefully through this session you will find that these applications are not as daunting as what you may think they are. And hopefully I will anticipate questions that you might have as we go through the application. And as part of this evening, we are going to go through the actual applications. I'll show you screenshots of what you would expect in the online tools and try and point out some of the areas where people have usually had the most frequent questions or the highest error rates. So I'd like to begin by looking at what is the financial aid process at the University of Notre Dame. We require both the financial aid application for free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, which is probably the application you've heard most about. We also require what's called the CSS Profile, which is a tool by the College Board, and I'll explain more about that application later. And through the CSS Profile, we collect additional documents through a portal offered by the College Board, and the service is called iDoc. It's an image documentation service. And many of our peer institutions also use this application and this service to collect the information, making it better for you in terms of not having to send 5 or 6 packets of information to different places. At Notre Dame, we use what we call preferred filing deadlines. So we don't cut people off. These are simply dates. And what we're hoping for is that if you follow these dates, our goal is to get a financial aid offer to the student by mid-March. We use February 15th as our preferred date for all students, whether they're in the early action or in a regular action admission program. So February 15th, 2019 would be the date that we're shooting for to receive both the FAFSA and the CSS Profile results. The supporting documentation that you send through iDoc, we ask that you send that by March 1st. Before you get started in terms of completing the applications, I would make sure that you as in parents and the student, have close at hand the Social Security card for each, your 2017 federal tax return, 2018, the latest wage information that you may have, your W-2 statements from 2017, bank statements and records of investments, as well as any untaxed income. And again, we'll get into that a little bit more as we look at the specific applications. Know that both the FAFSA and the CSS Profile are what are considered SMART applications. So not all questions are going to be shown to you as you complete. An example of that would be if you indicate as a parent that you are married, you shouldn't be getting questions about divorced and separated. So hopefully you have only the questions that really pertain to the student and to the parents. So let's just dive right into the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. The first thing I would strongly suggest that you as a family do is get what's called your FSA ID. The FSA ID, standing for the Federal Student Aid Index, would be the key that you're going to use. Just like when you go to a bank and you have a key, you're going to use this. A parent, at least one parent, needs an FSA ID. And the student needs an ID. And these are going to be used to sign the FAFSA electronically. A word of caution: make sure that you do not try to use the same email for both the parent and the student, because it won't work and it will lock down the application. So ensure that you have 2 separate email addresses. Again, one for the student, one for the parent. Parents, if you're completing an application for a second student, a continuing student, let's say you've done that before, that same FSA ID is what you're going to use. If you're going to complete 2 applications and both are going to be starting college and you've never done this, again, parents, you have one FSA ID and each student has their own ID, as these are separate applications. This is a screenshot of what you should expect to see when you go to the site FAFSA.gov, or we've just learned that they're changing the URL to studentaid.gov. This is the screen you should see. Again, caution. There have been, usually each year, some companies who bring up something like a FAFSA.com. If you are starting to get asked questions about providing a fee to complete this application, you need to get out of that web, because you're in the wrong place. So this is what it should look like, and I'm assuming for this purpose we're going to talk about new FAFSA applications. So you would click on the button that's under the New to the FAFSA Process, Start Here. This is what it's going to look like when you go to log in to the actual FAFSA application. So you see there, the first thing is the student's FSA ID username or verified email address. Again, that would be what you used when you signed up for the FSA ID. Then they would enter their FSA ID password and go on to the next screen. Then you could also see on the other section of that, there is a parent login as well. So I started the FAFSA using my name. I didn't use that all the way through, but just wanted to give you a sense that the student information will actually bring up the name of the student. Beware, caution on here, you should see on your screen that there is a 2019-2020 FAFSA. There's also a 2018-19. You want to select the 2019-2020 FAFSA. The student key is used as a PIN number of sorts so that you can go in and out of the FAFSA if needed. So you don't have to sit down and do the whole thing all at one time. This PIN number, 4-digit, is saved, I believe, for 45 days. And so it's good while you're doing this, and then if you need to go back into the FAFSA for any reason, up to 45 days. I'm going to focus tonight on dependent students using parental data. So the first thing that's going to come up will be personal information for the student. And again, many families, when they sit down to do this, maybe the parent is the one who's sitting at the keyboard. Make sure that wherever it says you or your in a section that says student information, that we're using the student name and the student identifiers. So here, ensure also that you are using the student's proper name. So if the student's name is Richard, you call him Ricky, what you would want on here would be Richard. It needs to match what is on that student's Social Security card, because at some point the information from your FAFSA will be sent through the Social Security Administration. There's also the student's birth date. You can see on the next screen here that now we're looking for permanent mailing address. So this would be the home address, not where the student anticipates living, or let's say they're at a boarding school. They would use the permanent home address where they are living. Student residency, that would be, again, where does the student live? This specific screen says Indiana because I started this application as myself and I live in Indiana. So it should be specific to the state that the student put on the identifying information. This information is used to calculate state grant eligibility. And while we're not going to talk about specific programs this evening, know that most states have state grant programs. Most of those programs do not transfer out of state. The great news at Notre Dame is we meet full demonstrated need, and even if you're not bringing a state grant with you, we would still meet your need without those funds. But that's the primary reason for this question. Here we're looking at telephone number. Again, I would say it's probably where could we reach the student if we need, typically a cell phone, unless there's a landline that you would prefer to put in there. Student, if you have a valid driver's license, I'd encourage you to include that information, because if you decide to use a federal student loan, that information will simply transfer to the loan application when you complete the required steps. And then driver's license. There should be, it shows again Indiana because I completed it this far, and then it will ask for the specific driver's license number. We're still, as you can see at the top toolbar, in student questions. And so we're looking here at what is the student's marital status. You'll see over to the right a drop-down box, and that's where you would choose the correct marital status for the student. I'm going to assume we're working with single students through this presentation. The next screen here is talking about, are you a U.S. citizen? You'll also see in the drop-down, eligible non-citizen. If we have listeners tonight who are DACA students or undocumented, at the University of Notre Dame, we do not use the FAFSA for those students. We'll use the CSS Profile application, and I'll point that out later when we get to that section. We're still on a student section, and what we're looking at here is high school completion. And so at the end of this academic year, the student would be starting college with a high school diploma. This next question, there will be a previously attended option when you click on the down. All students, even if you've taken advanced placement credit or maybe dual degree, you're still going to choose the option that is up on your screen, never attended college, first year. The degree that you're looking at for Notre Dame would be a first bachelor's degree. And will you have your first bachelor's degree before you begin in the fall? The answer to that would be no. If you mess those questions up, what's going to happen is you're going to eliminate any kind of eligibility that the student might have for a federal Pell Grant. Here, when we're looking, student and parent education completion, and those first questions there, are you interested in work study? Work study is a type of financial aid program. Answering yes to that does not obligate the student to work on campus. It just simply indicates the student is interested in learning more about that opportunity. Are you a foster youth, or were you any time in foster care? Yes or no? I'm going to assume as we proceed the answer to that was no. In the next two questions regarding high school completion for parents, these are the only two questions on the application that are about the biological parents. So if the parents who are listening are a biological parent and a step parent, again, in this question only, you would answer about the biological parents if you know that information. That is really demographic information that is collected for some programs who are looking at things like first generation college attendance. The next screen is about the student's high school. One of the things that a financial aid administrator has to do is to confirm that a student has graduated from high school. And so that is the reason for these questions. So you can enter the name of the high school. There should be an ability for you to search on that, and by state and what city, that should come up and you would select the correct information. Now we're on how you're going to tell the FAFSA processor where do you want this information for your FAFSA to be sent. And you'll see there that I have included Notre Dame. When you enter this screen, you would not see any schools. You're going to see some empty boxes, and what you're going to do is sort by the best match using that drop down. You can sort by a school's name, you can sort by a state, If you know what their federal school code is, which is often included on their website, you can simply put that information in and the school should come up. Again, a caution, if you're applying to, for instance, a state institution that has multiple campuses, it would be important that you make sure that you choose the campus or campuses that you want those results sent to. So you list the number of schools that you want. There is a limitation. If you want to add schools later, you may do so. But I would select here the schools that you are most interested in, because this is who's going to receive the FAFSA results first. So you'll see there I have the University of Notre Dame. Our federal school code is 001840. So I would check that box, that's what I want, and then you'll see on the bottom right corner, add more schools, or if we're the only school, you would be able to go to the next page. So I selected, you can see there, University of Notre Dame. It's the right school code, 001840. And I am a student who wants to live on campus. So when I click on the drop down, that's what I choose. And again, that might be different for each college that you decide to have your information sent to. You'll see on the screen, I didn't include it in the screenshots, there will actually be save buttons at the top toolbar on your screen when you're live in the actual application. I am one who likes to save my information as I go, just in case something happens to my electricity or I get disrupted and I have to walk away for a while. So I'm one who saves as I go along. Maybe not after every screen, but maybe after a number of screens. So we'll keep going here. And then you can also see that the application is keeping track of where am I in terms of completing this application. So we're looking at questions specific to dependency status. And I've only collected or given you some screenshots, a few of the questions. There are a whole series of questions a student would answer. Frankly, the majority of students who are going to be entering their first year are going to be dependent students and therefore reporting parental information. Students who are an orphan or a ward of the court, veteran, more than age 24, those are some of the reasons that a student might be considered independent. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you is if you think you fall into a category that would be an independent student, it's a conversation you need to have with each school because they're required to actually get that documentation from you. But for tonight's purposes, I'm going to assume that we are talking about a dependent student and that the student would have answered no to all of the questions that would be presented. Now we're moving on, as you can see, into parental information. So now a you or your would be about the parent. And we're looking at the marital status of the parent. So again, I read the question carefully because it could refer to a student, you, your. But here, what is the marital status of your parents? That would mean the student's parents. So I just chose married or remarried. There are other options, things like single, never married, divorced, those kinds of things. So you're simply going to choose the appropriate status. And then when did your parents get married? So as it relates to the answer that you put in the question above. Personal parent information. So again, this is going to be the information about the parent or parents who are providing their financial information on this application. So we're using here, this is the first parent. It doesn't matter if you put mother first or father first, but whomever it is, it would be that parent's social security number, their last name, and again, no nicknames. It should be just as it is on the social security card, and then that parent's birth date. You can see here, there's another screen. I had chosen married, so it's giving me the option for reporting to parents. In terms of parent information, so there is an email address here, and again, this question is asking, have you lived in Indiana? Again, yours will show the state of residence that you reported. Have we lived here for at least 5 years? My answer was yes. Again, this goes back to eligibility for grant programs that are in your state. So now we're moving into household information. So the email information is coming first, but then they're asking questions specifically about how many people are in the household and who do your parents provide more than half of the support. And you'll see one of the things that can be a little confusing with the FAFSA is that the information on income will be about 2017. The information that we'll look at regarding assets will be as of the date of the day you complete the FAFSA. This question is about the people that the parents would be providing more than half of the support during the academic year. So in this case, 2019-2020. If you're not quite sure who to include, again, the test is, do you provide more than half of that, or will you provide more than half of that person's support? Then they could be included. So again, keep in mind that's usually children, but again, we find many families with extended family living with them, a grandparent maybe, or an aunt or an uncle. So just look at the definition, read the definition, and that's who you're going to report here as the number of people in the household. Then you'll see that it says how many people in your household will be college students. And again, this is about the upcoming academic year. For this purpose, parents, even if you're going to be a college student, the federal rule does not allow you to consider your college enrollment on this student's application. If you're doing your own FAFSA, you would include yourself and the dependent student. Graduate students are eligible to be included in this number in college if the parent is providing more than half of the support. That's the federal rule. You'll see later when I talk about the CSS profile, we will not include the student who is in a graduate or a professional program in the number in college, as the students in that category are technically independent students for federal student aid. So we exclude them for our own institutional aid. When we're looking here, again, now we're moving into tax information. And we want to look here at what kind of return that you filed. Was it filed married jointly, or maybe separate, or head of household? So that's why I suggested earlier that you have your tax form at hand. Then you'll see near the bottom, it says IRS Data Retrieval Tool. And we would strongly encourage families to use this tool if they are eligible to do so. So there are some categories of students, or parents, pardon me, students as well, who will file that the IRS does not, and the FAFSA processor does not allow to use the data retrieval tool. The tool itself will explain whether you can or you can't use that actual tool. So here it's asking, which parent are you? So this is where you want to remember, who did you list first a few screens ago as parent 1? Was it mom or dad? And then parent 2 will come up. So are you parent 1 or parent 2 who's sitting at the computer? And then you would use that person's FSA ID that matches with that particular parent. So on that prior screen, I chose let's go and do the DRT. So the FAFSA tool is warning me that we are now leaving the FAFSA on the web and we are going to go into the IRS tool, and you'll see that in the right button. It's going to remind you again that there is going to be a pop-up saying you realize you're leaving the the FAFSA tool right now, and you want to say yes, that is okay. Now you get another warning. letting you know that you are actually in the IRS website, and they're just letting you know that that is where you are. And then you start to see that there is the parent that you thought should come up. Their information should present itself. Look at that, make sure it's really what you thought it was going to be. And there will be several screens with that kind of question. What you need to make sure that you do is go to the bottom of the screen and the second box from the bottom, transfer my tax information to the FAFSA form. What we see on our end often is a family will say to us, well, I went to the IRS website, but what we'll see is they viewed the information, but they didn't click this box and they didn't say transfer now. So it's important that you do that to be able to use the data retrieval tool. Here you can see the parent did click that, and it is confirming that the data retrieval tool was used and transferred the income information to the FAFSA application. And hopefully you've seen the difference and you can see that you're now back in the FAFSA tool. One of the reasons that I strongly suggest you use the data retrieval tool, and I'm not going to go into great detail at this time, is that there is a process called verification, and it is a federal process. And the federal processor identifies a certain number of families for, it's kind of like an audit in the IRS. A certain percentage of filers are chosen using rules. Schools are not given, so we have no idea why students or families are selected, but they're selected for this process verification. In theory, we've been told that if the family completes the FAFSA using the data retrieval tool, there should be a lower probability of being selected for the verification process. So that's one of the reasons we really encourage you doing that. The next screen here that you can see is about parent information in terms of income from work. One of the reasons this question is so important is that you pay tax like FICA tax, which is Social Security tax. And if you don't include parent wages, or you can see if you're a Schedule C filer because you have a small business, if you don't report your wages, that information is what is used to calculate those taxes. So if you don't report that information, the system won't calculate what withholding you would have had. So you're not going to report that information anywhere else. It's calculated behind the scenes. And this can make a big difference to what the family's share is calculated to be. Failure to put that information in there is going to make your family share go up. Putting that information in is going to make it go down. So again, and then make sure if both parents are working, you need to separate out that income, because there is another allowance that is run behind the scenes that looks at the wages for the parent who makes less. And the reason that they look at that information is because when a second parent is working, there are other expenses that are incurred. So like a second car or daycare or whatever. So again, don't lump them all together in one line. Make sure that you report each parent and their wages on those lines. Here you can see that the amount of parents' income for 2017, and right underneath there it tells you this information was transferred from the IRS. So there is nothing that you need to do there. Read that, make sure that's true. You did the transfer and click next. Here are questions on for tax filers only. And this one, I'm going to refer to my paper because this is so small I can't see the screen. So let me, pardon my move over. So what we're looking at here is child support, things like child support parents paid because of a divorce. So if you are not the custodial parent, but you have another child in your household, you're completing this for it, and you pay out Child support to another person for a child who does not live with you, that's what this question is asking. For those who might be divorced or separated and you receive child support, there is a separate question for that. The questions below, again, something like child support, that is not a taxable event, which is why it cannot transfer from the IRS data retrieval tool. But you see below, all of the other questions that are asked were actually part of the tax return, so the information came over from the Internal Revenue Service. So here is the question that is asking about child support received. So again, if you are in a situation where you are a divorced, separated parent, whether remarried or still single after the divorce or separation, and you're receiving child support, this is where you're going to include that information. The following question, payments to a tax-deferred pension. This comes from parent W-2 information. So what you're going to do is look for box 12, and you're looking for the codes D, E, F, G, or H. That's what gets reported here. This is probably the number one omission, and omission because I think people don't think about tax-deferred pensions as being untaxed income. So that amount that goes into that tax-deferred plan is included as income. The amount that is in the retirement plan is not included as an asset. So watch this question. It is probably the number one question we have to correct, or number one answer that we have to correct on applications every single year. So look for that. Again, if it's not coded with one of those letters, it should not be reported in that response. Then you would click Next. Now we're starting to look at asset information. As you can see here, the first question, and these answers are as of the day you are completing the application. Not tomorrow, not last week, not in 2017. As of the date you're completing the application. What cash, savings, and checking do you have? Simply put that answer. What is the net worth of parents' investments in real estate? And again, you can see there it says, don't include your home. So what are we looking for here? So let's say you have a second property that you have a cottage on. It would be the fair market value. What does that mean? If you put a sign out in front of that house, how much would you ask? So if I was going to sell my cottage, what would be my asking price? And what do I owe as an outstanding mortgage? And the difference is net. So it would be that kind of real estate and investments. Investments include things like stocks, bonds, money market, etc. Again, there's some instructions. They call them notes within the FAFSA application. Those are downloadable right near the front of the application. That might be another piece of information that you download, is the actual instructions. Or as you can see, there are question marks. You can click on the question mark and it will give you further instruction. The last one there, as of today, what is the net worth of parents' business and or investment farms? So if I looked at that and I didn't do this work, I'd think, what in the world are they asking here? What is an investment farm? So if farming is your family business and you live and work on that farm, your farm is excluded. If you are by trade a lawyer and you have land and you're growing avocados on that land, you are not a farmer per se according to this direction. So again, if you do have a farm, I'd suggest clicking on the question mark and seeing, what do I have to report? Same thing for business owners. It's a very unusual definition. It has to do with the number of full-time employees. So if you and a spouse have a small consulting business, and let's say there's a value of $20,000 to that business, you would not report that as a business because it's 100 or more FTE employees to include a business on here. So most families have very little, if any, in terms of assets, since retirement is excluded and your primary place of residence, your home, is also excluded. So you'll see there, if you look at the top, we are moving pretty quickly through this application. We're now in a student section, and I'm not going to show all the screens because frankly they're exactly the same as the parent information was, with one exception: it's about the student. So again, right near the bottom, I would encourage, if the student did complete a tax return in 2017, you would click the bottom link to the IRS, and you would complete that same process with the authentication into the IRS system, transfer the data, and then the system will bring you back to the remaining part of the FAFSA. So again, this is similar to what you saw. Student assets, it's really the same questions, although it gives an option to the student it may give an option to skip the questions. It also may do that in the parent section. It depends upon the age of the oldest parent and what kind of tax return the family filed. So many of our families that we see, if they file a 1040A and they are of a particular age, the system goes in and calculates how much assets that are reported would be excluded. And they will show a question that says, are your assets above a certain amount? And if they are, then you would have the question presented. If they're not, then the question would be skipped and you would get, can I skip this question? So we're almost to the end of the FAFSA. This question is paid preparer is what it means. So I'm paid, but I am not paid by you to help you prepare this. And so your answer to that would be no. And I would certainly hope that what we're showing you tonight would help you to understand that you probably do not need to go and pay for someone to help you complete this because of that data retrieval tool. So we'd go on to the next screen, and we're not quite done yet. We still have to submit. But what I'm showing you here is that the system's going to give a summary of what you data entered into the FAFSA while you were completing this process. Encourage you to review that information, make sure you didn't make any typos, and if it seems correct, you would go on to the next screen. This is a disclosure that says, I'm reading this and I agree, I'm not going to give my FSA ID to anyone else. I understand that any federal aid that I receive must be used for educational purposes. So it's very important that you read this statement, that you understand it, and if you agree, you click the box that says agree and go next. So the next thing is we're going to sign the FAFSA, and again, you can see my personal information is there, and I'm going to do the next, and I would go into the signature information and sign electronically using my FSA ID. And again, you can also see that this same thing will present for a parent. So both a parent and a student need to sign the FAFSA. And then it tells me congratulations. Once I have hit the submit button, it congratulates me and lets me know that I have completed my FAFSA. The output is going to look something like this. It's going to tell me that I'm done and also present what's called a student aid report. And I'll show you that in just a moment. But this is a good summary information. So we're going to move in just a moment to the CSS Profile application. So the CSS Profile, as I mentioned earlier, is a tool that is a part of College Board, which most families know more as the company that works with the SAT or AP exams. The CSS Profile is a fee-paid form, But the good news is there are fee waivers that are automatically embedded within the CSS profile for those families who meet the criteria. And you can see what those criteria are on the screen here. And another change, if you've done this in the past, is that the fee waivers are no longer limited to a specific number of schools. All colleges are included. The cost is $25 for a first application and $16 for each supplemental application. You'll see there a non-custodial household. So if there is a divorce or a separation, schools using the CSS profile often are going to ask for information about the non-custodial parent. This is very different than the FAFSA application, which is absent in asking any information about a non-custodial parent. So realize that that custodial parent is the primary basis for both the FAFSA and the CSS profile, but CSS profile schools are likely to also ask you for non-custodial parent information. If you're worried about that or you have no contact with the non-custodial parent, I would strongly suggest you check a school's website. Most of us who use this tool also have a common tool that we would use to have you request a waiver of a non-custodial. Those are then reviewed by each specific school, and they make their decision about whether or not they will waive that requirement. So when we get started on the profile, you can see here this first section is all about the student. And I mentioned earlier that our students who are DACA or undocumented students, this is the application that you're going to use. And you'll see that there are citizenship questions down there. And I'm not going to go into those, but you'll see some drop-down boxes there. And that is, you should find something in those boxes that would help us to know that you are a documented or a DACA student or an undocumented student. Student information, again, really we're just looking at basic information. I think that actually was a duplicate of the prior slide. My apologies for that. So you can see then here, students complete this information and then hit save and continue. And these are the dependency questions. These are the same questions that the FAFSA uses. So if you do the CSS profile first or only the CSS profile for in the DACA undocumented students, these are the same questions. Most students are going to answer no to all these questions, and therefore they're going to be providing parental information on the application. There are specific questions about homelessness. If those apply to you, I would make sure you read through that if you had some period of homelessness. Then we start to move into parental information. So again, we're looking at parent 1 and parent 2 of the custodial household in here. And we want to know what's the relationship to the student. And again, the next question seems a little odd, the deceased or whatever. Remember that part of the challenge that you may find is that maybe you had a life change since 2017. So maybe there is a parent who passed away and you filed a joint tax return in 17 because they were living at that time. Maybe there's a divorce situation that happened after 2017. Know that in both the FAFSA and the CSS profile, we can make adjustments for that. How that's done is going to vary a little bit by each school. But one of the reasons we appreciate having the CSS profile is it tells a much better story than what the FAFSA tells. And I think you'll see that as we go through this application. And again, telling a story is kind of like the student completing the admissions application. We see the CSS profile as the story of a family in a financial world, rather than simply just a few numbers of wages and adjusted gross income. We get much more story here. So again, this can be used. There is, just for those who might be listening today about international students, there is an international student profile. I'm not going to cover that today, but if you plan to file for need-based financial aid consideration as an international student for Notre Dame, there is an international profile. So similar to the FAFSA, where you picked the schools that you wanted the information to be sent to, you're going to make that same choice here on the CSS profile. So our CSS code number is 1841. You would simply enter that in the box and search, and it should come up for you, and you can add Notre Dame to the profile. If you don't know the number, this is what a search looks like, and I think they chose this specifically because these are all Duke University, but you can see that Duke University has multiple codes for different parts of their university, so nursing or law school or undergraduate. So if that's one of your choices, you would want to be using the 5156 code so that the correct school within Duke receives the information. And really that's true with all of the school codes. If you miskey this information, you're going to find you're not going to get an answer from schools because they won't receive the data, whether it's the CSS profile or whether it's the FAFSA. So here you can see that we are looking now at college program details and telling us what you're planning to do. So again, year in school for the student, just as I mentioned on the FAFSA, you're going to choose the choice of first year, never previously attended, even if you are dual enrolled. And then where are you going to live, on campus or off campus? Are you applying for admission under early decision, regular decision, whatever that is? So you can just see the students selected multiple schools, and that's why those questions were asked multiple times, because they could be different. Unlike the FAFSA, there is not a data retrieval tool for the CSS profile. So that's where I said you need your 2017 tax return. And as you see here by the breakdown, it helps us because you are actually breaking down the adjusted gross income into wages or things like interest or business or farm income and loss. So literally you're going to pick up the line items that are from the tax return. Similar before, as I mentioned on the FAFSA, you need to make sure that you use income earned from work. And the College Board made sure that we recognize we're not going to include cents. So if you earned $80,000.61, you're going to use your typical rounding rules and round up to $80,001 or round down. But again, you'll see these questions, and I mentioned a little earlier, tax-deferred pension is the primary omission that families make or error they make because they just don't think about that. Health savings accounts are they are on your actual tax return. Many families don't have that. They might have a cafeteria plan. Be careful that you're not including a cafeteria plan. And I'm not going to go into the definitions. If you think you have one of those, it would be on your W-2 form, and I would look at what the coding is and the instructions here. Now we're into the second part of parent information, and you can see that what we are now looking at is what income happened in 2018. And as I said, the great thing about the 2017, what they now call the prior year, so we're starting in 2019, but you're using 2-year prior information, so 2017. On the FAFSA, on the profile, we're going to see your 2018. So we're going to be able to see some income trends. And we at Notre Dame look at this very carefully and try and ask you questions up front in case there is a change in income, either up or down, because we want to make sure that we give your family the best financial aid offer up front. So again, you can see it's going to break down some various things, and it asks what kind of untaxed income. There's likely additional questions that are going to present depending on your answer to the questions. Asset information, so cash, savings, and checking. It should be, assuming you complete this the same day as you do the FAFSA, the answer that you put on the FAFSA should equal the profile or vice versa. You'll notice here in this list that the assets reported on the CSS profile are different than what is on the FAFSA, and they are actually presented in a different way. So the home, primary place of residence, if a family owns a home, they're going to report the fair market value of the home and the debt on the home. We also ask for information about when you purchased it, what was the purchase price. And not to be worried. We know that housing, say, in California or New York or Chicago is more expensive than South Bend, Indiana, or Kansas City, Kansas, or other places in the country. And we put that within the context of where a family lives. We also are not expecting that you go out and sell your home. So we're looking at the value, the debt, how much you still owe. Could you still purchase this home? So if you were frugal, you bought a home and you paid it off, we're going to look at that and look at how much did that home maybe appreciate. Could you still buy the same home? So simply because we're asking the information, please don't worry and make assumptions about how we're going to use that information. Investments, the questions are split apart, but the net value should be the same as what you report on the FAFSA. So investments are in there. Parent assets held in the names of younger children. These would be things like 529 plans, which are also reported on the FAFSA, but are probably going to be lumped into the net investment question that we reviewed previously. As you'll see here, the other real estate information is a separate question than what it was on the FAFSA. So it's going to, again, ask value and debt if this is something you have. If not, you're simply going to enter zeros. And the same thing with business and farm. While the FAFSA excludes business and farm information for the majority of families, it is reported for all families on the CSS profile. But we're going to ask some additional information about that business or farm, and those assets are considered in very different ways than something like liquid investments that you might have. Then we move into a housing summary. So this goes to who are the children, who are the dependents that you told us. So for an example, if you answer the question, there are 2 married parents and there are 3 children, you would have a household of 5 people. And so the parents, we showed that information earlier. Then you would enter 3 dependent children or 3 dependents. So again, maybe it's 2 parents and maybe grandma lives with you. So that's what the next section is going to be about. And you can see there's 1 here, but you can add a dependent. One of the things we look at Notre Dame, and you'll see on this grid here will be when you're actually in the tool, is information about private school tuition. So we understand many families have or are paying for private school tuition, and that's something that we'll consider upfront automatically for those families who are reporting the private school tuition. There are actually 2 separate questions. It's asked here and then in an aggregate sum question in a different part of the application. And again, you can see here the family was reporting about Jean-Pierre, and it's a sibling of the student you're completing the application for. And our next slide then tells us more about Jean-Pierre. So now we know that this current time, Jean is a 10th grader. Next year, he'll be 11th. Again, this is something that we're really attentive to at Notre Dame because we want to anticipate what's going to happen to financial aid since we're in a need-based financial aid system. What we know is maybe this is your first child going to college. Now I know from this example, in 2 years, this student will have probably a sibling in college, which would increase eligibility for need-based assistance. Similarly, if they reported that a student was in college, but they let us know that that student is a junior in college, we're going to let you know how many people we used in terms of college numbers in preparing the financial aid offer for your student. And you would anticipate in a need-based system like Notre Dame and most other private institutions, they're going to use number in college. And if that changes down to 1, financial need is going to go down. So that's why financial aid applications are an annual application process. because income changes, the people who live in your home and what their status is in regards to private secondary or elementary school or college do change. One of the unique things about the CSS profile that you didn't see in the FAFSA is there is a special circumstances section embedded within the application. One of the things the College Board has done is listed some of the most common things that we see. So again, I mentioned we're working with 2017 income. Well, again, a lot of what we hear from families is, well, that was an unusual year. Again, with self-employed persons, maybe you're an attorney and you ended a big case and your 2017 income is much higher than what 2018 is going to appear. Or maybe you got a bonus and your company now has shared that they are not going to include bonus income anymore because profits are down. So all of those kinds of things you could share with us through the special circumstances section. I'd also note that at Notre Dame we have a section of our website called Change in Circumstances. So it's great if you share this information here with us. You'll see out on our website very specific information. We don't have it up yet for 2019-20, but you can get an idea of the type of documentation that we'll actually require to move further into exploring any kind of change in circumstance. So again, you'll see on that list things like elder care expenses. So maybe they weren't in the household, but maybe you are providing money to parents and they are not in your household, so you can't claim them as an exemption, but perhaps you're responsible for paying part of their living expenses. Or again, a lot of what we're starting to see are families from various cultures where the value of persons who are older or family members, extended family members, where they're paying for a family who might live overseas. So again, we want to be sensitive to all those kinds of culture experiences or changes in income or circumstances. So please take a look at this section as you complete the application. If you've completed the profile and something changes, not to worry. We, as I mentioned, have the change of circumstances out on our website, and you would be able to advise us of that change. This is what is the student dashboard from the College Board. So once they have completed the CSS profile application and they have paid the fee, it will show you the colleges and programs. Some programs would be things like scholarship organizations. There are organizations like that who require the CSS profile as their application. So as you can see, it's going to list the school and organizations that required the profile and that you had the information sent. And then you see your next steps, which might include the fact that different schools might be asking you to send specific documentation through the IDOC service, and then that information will be transferred electronically to the University of Notre Dame. A really quick note about corrections. The FAFSA application does allow for a family to go back into the application, authenticating using the FSA ID for the parent and student. You can make a correction. The CSS profile does not have a means for you to correct information. So what you would do in that case would be to simply send an email to our office. Our website is financialaid.nd.edu, and our email address is finaid, like financial aid, FINAID @nd.edu. So you can send an email or you can PDF a copy of this summary dashboard information and the summary application that will come up for you after you're completed the profile and submitted. You could send a PDF and you could write the corrected information on there, and we'll take a look at that for you here at Notre Dame. Our school codes, as I mentioned earlier, for the FAFSA is 001840, and for the CSS profile, our school code is 1841. Again, if you're submitting applications to other schools, a good source of that is their website or perhaps brochures they've sent But remember, there's a tool within each, the FAFSA and the CSS Profile, where you'll be able to search for that number. Again, if you choose to add additional schools after, you're going to have to choose to remove a school and add the school. Don't worry, because we get this information sent to us shortly after you complete the application. Again, just a quick note on that. At Notre Dame, we have a portal. The student is probably most familiar through the admission side. There is a financial aid portal as well. We've not started to load financial information yet. We are starting to receive it, so don't panic if you've sent something in but you don't see anything in our Notre Dame financial aid portal. If you've checked that student aid report that I mentioned on the FAFSA and it shows Notre Dame's school code, you can be assured we'll get that information. In the same thing with the CSS Profile, you can look at their dashboard. Theirs is more of an immediate time, rather ours is delayed because we have to get the data, load it into our system, and then refresh the system overnight. But we will post information as soon as we have our system set up, and you'll be able to view through the Notre Dame portal as well. I mentioned the iDoc service earlier. Again, many of our peer schools also use this particular service. And it's really to make it easier for students and parents. So you will receive, you being the student, and I think this is one of those things, parents, you need to understand, schools are going to communicate with the student. So while it might be your information or you may be paying the bill, we do understand that at the school level, but this is all about the student is the one completing the application for admission, and it's going to be their financial aid. So communications are done with a student. As I mentioned, you can access the iDoc portal through the College Board. That will show you what you have uploaded. And we encourage you to upload all your documents at one time. It's much cleaner for the school because then we'll get one file with all your documents rather than uploading them piecemeal. Then they'll all be in separate files, and your portal will start to look a little funny because it's going to show them one at a time versus the fact that you've done them all but on separate dates. So again, this is what it looks like when you go back into iDoc. The student logs in and they're going to have an authentication and their own code to get in there. That is what the authentication screen looks like. And if you have questions, my suggestion would be to call our office. You see the number there on the screen, or write to finaid@nd.edu. That email address is responded to by one of our counselors who are very knowledgeable, and I'm certain they can help you. We also have great FAQs that are out on our website, and I'd also encourage you to be watching for what we call our Financial Aid 101 series. This is just one aspect of that series. Your students should have already received at least 2 email newsletters from us reviewing a lot of this information in preparation to help you through this financial aid process. Again, I thank you for joining me today. I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you very much.